Imagine a country so powerful that it can strike anywhere in the world within minutes. A country with hundreds of military bases, the most advanced weapons, and a defense budget larger than the next several nations combined. Now imagine that same country, choosing not to fully attack one of its biggest rivals. Not because it can't, but because it understands something most people don't. The United States is not avoiding Iran out of weakness. It's avoiding a situation that could spiral completely out of control. Because once that line is crossed, there's no going back. For years, tensions between the United States and Iran have been building. Sanctions, threats, proxy conflicts, cyber attacks, and occasional military strikes have kept both sides on edge. At times, it has looked like war is just one step away. And yet that final step is never taken. The US applies pressure, but stops short of full invasion. So the real question is not, why hasn't the US attacked Iran? The real question is, why does it keep stopping right before the point of no return? To understand this, you have to forget everything you think you know about war, because modern war is not just about military strength, it's about consequences. And Iran represents one of the most dangerous consequence chains in the world. First, Iran is not an easy target. This is not a country that collapses in weeks. Iran has spent decades preparing for exactly this scenario. Its military strategy is not based on matching the US directly. Instead, it's built around survival and retaliation. Iran has developed a massive arsenal of ballistic missiles, not just a few advanced ones, but thousands. Short-range, medium-range, and potentially long-range systems capable of hitting targets across the Middle East and beyond. And unlike traditional warfare, Iran doesn't need perfect accuracy. It relies on volume, overwhelming attacks, missile saturation. Even the most advanced defense systems can struggle when dozens or even hundreds of missiles are launched at the same time. It's not about stopping one, it's about trying to stop all of them. And that's where things become unpredictable. Now imagine US military bases spread across the Middle East, strategic locations, critical infrastructure, thousands of personnel, all within range. In a full-scale war, those bases don't just become targets, they become the front line, and Iran doesn't need to defeat the US military. It just needs to make the cost of staying too high, too expensive, too painful. Because that's how modern asymmetric warfare works. You don't win by overpowering your enemy, you win by making them question whether the fight is worth continuing. But the military aspect is only one part of the equation. The real power lies somewhere else, something far more dangerous: energy. There is a narrow waterway in the Middle East that most people never think about. But it controls a massive portion of the world's oil supply, the Strait of Hormuz. Every single day, millions of barrels of oil pass through this small stretch of water. It connects major oil-producing countries to the global market, and Iran sits right next to it. In a conflict scenario, Iran has the ability to disrupt or even block this route. Not permanently, it doesn't need to. Even temporary disruption is enough, because global markets react instantly. Oil prices surge, transportation costs increase, supply chains begin to break down, and within days the effects spread across the entire world. This is where the real fear begins, because now it's no longer just a regional conflict. It becomes a global economic crisis. And the United States understands this. A full-scale war with Iran would not just be fought on the battlefield, it would be felt in gas stations, stock markets, and everyday life. Higher fuel prices, rising inflation, economic instability, and when the public starts feeling the cost of war directly, support disappears faster than expected. But even this is not the biggest concern, because the situation doesn't exist in isolation. There are other players watching, waiting, calculating. China. China has deep economic ties with Iran. Energy agreements, trade relationships, long-term strategic interests. If Iran becomes unstable, China doesn't just lose a partner. It loses access to critical resources and routes. And that creates pressure. Not necessarily military pressure, but economic and geopolitical pressure. Now, the United States is not just dealing with Iran. It's dealing with a broader system, a global balance. And disrupting that balance comes with unpredictable consequences. At the same time, Russia also plays a role in the background, not always directly, but strategically. Global powers don't operate in isolation. Every action creates a reaction. Every move shifts the balance, and a war with Iran would not stay contained, it would expand. Across the Middle East, Iran has influence, not always through official channels, but through networks, groups, alliances. If a full war begins, those networks activate, attacks increase, instability spreads. Multiple fronts open up. Suddenly, the United States is not fighting one war. It's managing several conflicts at once. And that's where things become dangerous, because multi-front conflicts are difficult to control. Now combine all of this with the financial cost. War is expensive, extremely expensive. A prolonged conflict with Iran could cost hundreds of billions of dollars, and that's just the direct cost. Indirect costs are even higher: economic disruption, market instability, global trade impact, and in a world already dealing with uncertainty, that kind of pressure can push systems to their limit. So the United States faces a choice: start a war that it can win militarily, but lose strategically, or maintain pressure without crossing the line. That's why you see a pattern: sanctions, targeted strikes, diplomatic pressure, but no full-scale invasion, because once a full war begins, control is lost, and control is everything. The goal is not just to defeat an enemy, it's to manage the outcome. And a war with Iran is one of those rare scenarios where the outcome cannot be fully controlled. Too many variables, too many players, too many consequences. So instead of escalation, there is calculation. Every move is measured, every action is limited, because the risk is not just losing a battle, it's triggering a chain reaction. And once that reaction starts, it doesn't stop where you expect. It spreads across regions, across economies, across the world. That is the real reason the United States has not fully attacked Iran. Not fear of defeat, but awareness of consequence. Because sometimes the most powerful move is choosing not to make one, and sometimes the war you don't start is the one that saves you from something far bigger. And as long as the balance remains fragile, as long as the stakes remain global, as long as the consequences remain unpredictable, the tension will continue, the pressure will build, the conflict will stay just below the surface, close enough to feel, but never close enough to explode. At least, not yet. Another reason the US is careful? This war won't stay between two countries. Iran has influence across the Middle East, not directly, but through networks, groups, allies, militias. If war starts, it spreads. Fast. US bases in the Middle East? At risk. Allies? At risk. Entire region? Unstable. Even experts warn that attacking Iran could trigger a full regional conflict. Chatham House. And once that happens, there's no easy way out. The real strategy. So if the US is not attacking fully, what is it doing? It's playing a different game. Not destruction, but control. Limited strikes, economic pressure, sanctions, psychological warfare. Even recent attacks avoided Iran's oil infrastructure on purpose. Wikipedia. Because destroying that would trigger global chaos. So instead of war, the US is choosing something more dangerous: controlled tension. But here's the part no one talks about. The United States is not just avoiding a war with Iran, it's avoiding what comes after that war. Because once it starts, it won't be a war anymore. It becomes a chain reaction, and that reaction could pull in countries the US is not ready to fight. The China factor. There's a reason the US moves carefully, and that reason is China. China is not directly involved in this conflict, but it doesn't need to be, because Iran is not isolated. It has economic ties, strategic ties, and long-term agreements that go far beyond what most people understand. In 2021, China and Iran signed a 25-year cooperation agreement. This wasn't just a trade deal. This was a long-term strategy. Energy, infrastructure, military coordination. Now think about this. If the US launches a full-scale war on Iran, and Iran's economy collapses, who loses? Not just Iran. China loses access to energy routes. Supply chains get disrupted. Global trade gets unstable. And when global trade gets unstable, China reacts. Not necessarily with war, but with pressure, economic pressure, strategic moves, regional positioning. Now, the US is not just dealing with Iran, it's dealing with a much bigger system, and that's a risk the US cannot ignore. The truth. So the real reason the US isn't fully attacking Iran is not weakness, it's calculation. It's understanding that power is not just about starting wars, it's about knowing which wars not to start. Because some wars, once they begin, don't end where you expect. They grow. They spread. They change everything. And this is one of them. So next time you hear about tensions, missile strikes, or rising threats, remember this: the real war isn't being fought on the battlefield. It's being controlled, calculated, and delayed, because the moment it begins for real, the world won't be the same again.